Boucher was the head of an elite chapter of the Hells Angels. Everyone knew Mum Boucher was a killer, and he knew everyone knew.
Amidst the bloodiest biker war in history, the streets of Quebec were soaked in violence. Rival gangs fought for control, and the police were powerless. The Hells Angels, led by the ruthless Maurice "Mom" Boucher, had a stranglehold on the province. Corruption ran so deep that even high-ranking officers were rumored to be on Boucher's payroll. Bombings, assassinations, and shootouts became routine, and the justice system was paralyzed. The city lived in fear. But then, something changed. A man on the inside decided to flip. His name was Danny Kane. He was an outlaw, a criminal, and a man who had spent years trying to climb the Hells Angels hierarchy. But in a world built on blood and power, he was always kept at arm's length. Resentful, angry, and desperate, he did the unthinkable. He became an informant. For 6 years, Kane played a dangerous game, feeding the police crucial intelligence while remaining embedded within one of the most secretive and violent organizations in the world. But as the years passed, the line between informant and criminal blurred. The more he worked for the police, the deeper he sank into the underworld. His story is one of deception, violence, and a man slowly unraveling as he lived a double life. Danny Kane was born in October 1968 in a small village near Montreal. His father was a bricklayer, and his mother stayed at home with him and his 2 sisters. Money was tight, and life was tough. When he was still a boy, his parents sent him to live with an uncle who had no children of his own. Though he returned home on weekends and holidays, this separation left a lasting scar. He grew up feeling like an outsider. By the time he was 16, he had left home for good. He drifted from job to job, doing whatever it took to survive. Eventually, he landed in Saint-Hubert, a small city on the outskirts of Montreal. There, he crossed paths with Patrick Lambert, a local criminal and member of a small biker gang called the Condors. Kane, the loner, suddenly found himself drawn into the outlaw biker lifestyle. At 18, Kane officially joined the Condors. His job was simple: keep the gang's drug dealers supplied and make sure they never ran out of product. For this, he earned a modest $700 a week. But Kane wasn't content with being a small-time player. He wanted more. The Condors later merged with a Hells Angels-controlled group known as the Evil Ones, a move that put Kane and his crew under the control of a much larger and more dangerous organization. But Kane hated answering to anyone. Instead of proving himself to the Hells Angels, he walked away and started his own operation. From 1990 to 1992, he built a lucrative business selling drugs, weapons, and explosives. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. When a rival nightclub owner crossed him, Kane used dynamite to blow up the man's business. When drug dealers failed to pay him on time, he made examples of them. He kidnapped 3 men, beating them so severely that one nearly died. But his most costly mistake came when he tried to intimidate 2 former associates who had stolen from him. What was meant to be a simple warning turned into a disaster. In the middle of the beating, Kane's gun accidentally went off, critically wounding one of the men. The noise alerted nearby residents, and within minutes, police were on the scene. Kane was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to 25 months in prison. Getting into the Hells Angels wasn't like joining a street gang. You didn't just show up and ask for a patch. It was a long, grueling process, and even then, there were no guarantees. Kane had connections. He reached out to David Carroll, a high-ranking member, and Walter Stadnick, the national president of Hells Angels Canada. They both knew Kane's reputation. He was reliable, ruthless, and most importantly, he never complained. But that wasn't enough. Instead of granting him full membership, they threw him to the bottom of the ladder. Kane was forced into the lowest ranks, where he spent years as a glorified servant. He was on call 24/7, forced to chauffeur senior members, pick up their tabs, and do whatever dirty work they didn't want to touch. He had gone from running his own empire to fetching drinks for men who didn't respect him. It was humiliating, but Kane swallowed his pride and played the long game. He waited, biding his time, hoping that one day he'd finally wear the patch. When the club needed someone to establish a new puppet gang in Ontario, Kane jumped at the opportunity. He saw it as his ticket to full membership, but what he didn't realize was that he was nothing more than a disposable pawn in a much larger game. The Ontario expansion was a disaster. The gang Kane built, the Demon Keepers, never gained the power or influence he had been promised. And then he got arrested again. But this time, something inside him snapped. He had been loyal. He had done everything they asked. And still, they treated him like a nobody. That's when he made the decision that changed everything. He picked up the phone and called the RCMP. The Ontario expansion failed spectacularly. The new gang never gained traction, and Kane was arrested again. This time, he realized something: he was just a pawn in a larger game. Stadnik had never intended for him to rise through the ranks. Kane was disposable. Furious and humiliated, he made a decision that would change everything. He picked up a phone and called the police. Rather than contacting local authorities who he knew were corrupt, he reached out to the RCMP's Outlaw Biker Task Force. In his first meeting, Kane spilled everything he knew. He detailed gang operations, named key players, and exposed the Hells Angels' deep ties with the Montreal Mafia. The police were stunned. They had never had an informant this close to the inner workings of the club before. For the next 6 years, Kane lived a double life. He met with police 2 to 3 times a week, giving them crucial intelligence. He told them about planned assassinations, bombings, and drug deals. But the deeper he went, the more blurred the lines became. Kane's information led to the arrests of dozens of high-ranking members, including Mom Boucher himself. The evidence he provided helped convict Boucher of multiple murders, effectively dismantling the Hells Angels' leadership in Quebec. However, Kane's own crimes couldn't be ignored. While working as an informant, he had continued committing violent acts, including multiple murders. The police turned a blind eye for years, but eventually it became clear that Kane had crossed too many lines. The stress of his double life had taken its toll. Kane was unraveling. He was drinking too much, spending too much, and talking too much. His fellow gang members still treated him like an outsider. No matter how many crimes he committed, he would never be one of them. He was still the errand boy, still the man picking up their debts. One member forced him to cover an $80,000 drug loss. Meanwhile, high-ranking members like Carol had their debts forgiven entirely. Kane was cracking. He called his police handlers constantly, but not with information. Instead, he rambled about prostitutes, bragging about his sexual conquests, putting the women on the phone to verify his stories. It was pathetic. It was a cry for help. On August 7, 2000, Danny Kane was found dead in his Montreal home. The official cause? Suicide. When police searched his home, they found something unexpected: financial records stolen from the Hells Angels. Records that detailed exactly how much money the club was making. Over 8 months, the gang had pulled in more than $100 million in Quebec alone. Kane may have been dead, but his final act set off a wave of arrests. Using his documents, law enforcement took down 42 Hells Angels members for murder and attempted murder. Maurice "Mom" Boucher would spend the rest of his life behind bars, dying in prison in 2022. Danny Kane played a dangerous game and paid the ultimate price. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a victim. He was a man caught between two worlds, unable to fully belong to either. He wanted power, but he was never given it. He wanted revenge, but it consumed him. His story is one of deception, betrayal, and the high cost of trying to outplay the most ruthless outlaw bikers in the world. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from, stories of crime, power, and the people who risked it all in the underworld.